Hello, my name is Dr. Cheryl Thompson. I am faculty in performance at the Creative School, Toronto Metropolitan University. I am also director of the Laboratory for Black Creativity. Welcome to our series, Remixing the Archive, Conversations with Black Creatives. The Laboratory for Black Creativity is proud to present Dancer and the Archive, Seika Boye and Lisa Cox in conversation. In this episode, Boye discusses her creative practice as a dancer, writer, and academic. Dr. Seika Boye is a scholar, writer, educator, and artist whose practices revolve around dance and movement. She teaches practical and lecture courses at the Center for Drama, Theater, and Performance Studies, and is the director of the research-oriented Institute for Dance Studies at the University of Toronto. Seika has given numerous interviews about her work, exhibitions, and contributions to Canada's dance history. Lisa Cox is a graduate of Concordia University's Interdisciplinary Studies program and assistant professor in the School of Performance at Toronto Metropolitan University. She relishes work that combines music, movement, and heightened language, and as an actor, has appeared in numerous stage productions and has worked with emerging playwrights through Playwriting Units and Festival. So please enjoy the first episode in our series, Remixing the Archive.
Thank you so much for being here today with us, Seika. Perhaps I can ask you to introduce yourself and share what your creative practice is.
Sure, thanks, Lisa. My name is Seika Boye, sometimes known as Dr. Seika Boye. My work title is assistant professor at the University of Toronto and director of the Institute for Dance Studies. But those are more recent titles. My creative practice, first and foremost, is as a dancer. I trained and danced from the time I was 3 years old and had a professional career as a dancer. I grew up doing jazz tap and ballet and musical theater, but my professional training and career were in modern and postmodern dance. And I certainly also consider writing part of my creative practice, reading part of my creative practice. It's pretty expansive at this stage for me, but my training and my roots are in dance.
Beautiful. Thank you. I was telling you that I creeped you a little bit. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you and for you to share what an archive is for you.
Sure, this is a big question. My doctoral research, which I started in 2010, was looking at dance within Canada's Black population. And so, of course, that took me to archives. But prior to that, I worked as a research assistant at Dance Collection Dance, which is Canada's only dedicated Canadian archive. And they have at that time, they had over 500 fonds or collections. And my job was to update the 500 file folder collection. So anything that was in a file. So that's just a bit of grounding in terms of my relationship to archives. I think of archives in two ways. The institutional archive, which is often a bricks and mortar archive and is focused on the institution that houses it, and holds any number of things. So that could be the records of the institution or organization itself. And if the archive functions more broadly than that, then it's a repository or a place that stores a collection of things. But I also think a lot about personal archives, and in my more recent work, I had a residency at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and I structured that to be a self-archiving project. So I was asking questions about, and am asking questions about, what it means for artists to archive their work and how we understand artistic practice. So loosely and most broadly, it's an accumulation of things that are brought together under some umbrella or another to tell the history of that thing, person, institution, whatever it is. Child, I just moved, and so I have two kids, they're 10 and 14, and I'm looking at the things that I've kept of theirs, and 14 years is not an insignificant amount of time to have been collecting something for an individual person, and I look at their archive. So I think of it very loosely and very broadly, as an accumulation of objects. And because I'm a dancer, I'm always thinking about ephemeral items and ephemerality and how we document things that appear not to be documentable. And in looking and doing research in Blackness, I often say I'm looking for things that appear not to be there, because of how they have been organized by an institution or by an archivist or the care of things. So, yeah. I know it's a lot. It's a lot. I think about it every day, many times a day.
I'm sure. Really central to that definition, I think, is the idea of things.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Today, I would add to that things that have been given importance or have been deemed to be important. And of course, the important part can be a site of intervention. It can be a site of exclusion. So who is deciding what is important is a big part of what I think about in relationship to archives and the archive. And how we place value on objects and who places that value on them. It's why one of the reasons I was interested in self-archiving, because I wanted to explore all of the stages that take place when things are being archived, from the idea of donating. Of course, I didn't donate things to myself, but I put a lot of things in a bin. Writing a finding aid, who writes a finding aid, and for those who don't know what that is, institutional archives have, when you go to the archive and you look at the list of their collections and you say, I would like to look at this person or this building or this organization's archive font collection, you'll be handed often a finding aid if it's been cataloged. And the finding aid lists what's there, and it's organized in a particular way, and the objects are described in a particular way. Sometimes more information is available about some things, less about others. Points of access, dates of access are included there. So the importance of items and objects is something, and then how those items and objects have been described, provided access, restricted access, all of those things are a big part of what I consider. And again, because of dancing, the dance itself is gone. When you are looking at dance archives, so there are often all of these objects and items and documents, writing, photographs around the dance, and maybe there's a score, not always. But in theater, in music, in art, and this is when you work in dance studies, as I do, I'm a dance scholar, a dance historian, that's one of the first things that you contend with. And people have a lot of different things to say about it, but in essence, the dance itself is no longer there. So you're always looking for traces. And of course, the relationship to, I've learned a lot through thinking about dance and archives to approach my work in Blackness and archives, because you have to often look other than where it seems obvious to look.
And I love this idea of looking for things that aren't there.
Appear not to be there.
Appear not to be there. Because we are, I don't know, I frequently feel so erased in history. So that appear not to be there, because we are. This is what I hear.
Of course.
We are.
Absolutely. And if you think about institutional archives, and you think about archives that were operating in support of the Canadian nation state, who did the nation state consider to be important? If we come back to this idea of importance and things and objects and items, women are often not easy to locate in archives after they've been married. And even before, if they were children or did not have a job. They're always under the umbrella of someone else. And so we have family friends, and at their front door, there was a page from the phone book, and I saw their family name, and I said, oh, is this direct relative? Yes, it was my aunt. Oh, your aunt was in the phone book with your last name? That's so rare. Yes, she was an old maid. She was, and she had a career. She was a professional, but it was rare at the time. It was in the 1930s in Toronto. So that idea of erasure, and if we're going to talk about Blackness and womanhood, if importance has not been placed upon a group of people, their lives, their objects, then they may not have been cataloged in a formal institutional archive. But that doesn't mean that there aren't archives. And that's, if we go back to what I was talking about early on, what are the accumulation of objects that individuals have that are in personal archival collections? Someone's closet could be an archive. Under the bed could be an archive. The garage. And that's where the detective work, or the looking for things that appear not to be there, you start to become very adept at looking elsewhere and finding wonderful things.
Cool. How do you think that impacts creativity?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think archives impact creativity, or why are they important to creativity?
Yeah, I think the way that I would answer that today, and because we're both situated in universities, we're teaching, and sometimes I teach history, theater history, dance history. Dance history is my first, and I'm in a theater program, theater and performance studies. But if we think about training and the artists who have been well archived, and the works that are shown to students that have been and that appear to be important, if we think about research papers and students researching those artists who have a lot of material on or about them, then the same artists are repeatedly researched, the same artists' work is repeatedly done. And so I think it can lead to a repetition. What's exciting is when that idea is challenged and opened up, and students are invited to step outside of those people who have a large footprint in a library or in an archive, and are welcome to be influenced by others who have wonderful collections of work. They just haven't been accumulated in that way. But it can really present a narrow idea of what is valued, a narrow idea of how to go about doing things, a narrow idea of what a creative practice or a creative career can look like. And that's from a pedagogical perspective.
Yeah. Outside of the pedagogical perspective, for those who aren't teaching, how do you think it impacts creativity?
I think that really relates to what your process is. Some people are very committed to working with archives, whether they label them that or not, in the way that they approach their storytelling. Or if your practice is very consciously about storytelling, that story itself and the places, the buildings, the objects, the items, every story arguably could have an archive that is the archive of that story that is told. So if you think of name a favorite play that you've been in or read, or something that you've written, what would an example be?
I will big up now you see her, that I did with quote unquote collective that I was in and wrote part of.
Great. And so if you think of that work and you think of every object that is named in the work itself, every place, every document or image, and I don't mean documents of the performance, but within the world of the performance, there are many, all of the furniture the clothing. What do you learn about the work through those things, through that ephemera? And then, of course, there's the documentation of all of the times that you performed that work. So there are that relationship to creativity, the stuff, the matter, the material, but also memory and the subjectivity of memory, of creativity, of being within something, it's huge. It's massive. To me, it's everywhere. But that's because archives are a subject of my research, and also right now of my creativity. The archive as medium. And there's a great article I started writing, and I don't have the author reading. I don't have the author's name on the tip of my tongue, but it is people's practice is working through the archival, and we see more and more of it. It's labeled more and more as that, but I think that's something that's been happening for centuries, contending with how we leave traces of ourselves as human beings.
Yeah, it's funny when you asked me to like name a show that I was connected to. I was connected to that show for over 3 years, from inception to final performances. And I instantaneously started to think of my notebooks. So for every workshop where we got together to engage in process, I would have a new workbook and just to write, brainstorm, put notes down, etc. And so I instantaneously started to think of those documents and my wigs. I had a lot of wigs show. I was like, oh, my wigs as archives. Fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating. And if we talk about wigs and hair and blackness, boom. If we talk about wigs and performance, there are many, many ways. If you use your wigs as an example of a collection of things that were significant to that performance and to that show and to the meaning making in the show,
100%.
There are infinite possibilities.
So many conversations about the wigs, hours of me going, which one should it be? This for this? What style should it be? When should it actually be my own hair? Should it actually be my own hair? I feel like hair in blackness is so real.
It's profound, right? It's profound. And if you think about that, and you think about 10 people coming into a project, and they're going to look at Lisa Cox's wigs as part of this show and performance, and they're going to talk about the meaning that was made. Each of those people would think about that differently, and their own lived experience would impact how they were thinking about those wigs, how they were thinking about and the meaning making, and they would have different relationships to the meaning that came from those wigs. Some of the meaning some people wouldn't see any meaning other than a different hairstyle.
Yep.
Others would see much more.
Absolutely. So much to think about. Okay. If you could go back in time, let's say around high school, what is one thing that you would tell your younger self in relation to the creative practice that you do today?
I would tell myself that I don't need to be one thing or the other, or that being a dancer does not eliminate you from being a writer, or being a writer doesn't mean you're not a dancer. This idea to categorize, I would really have alleviated myself of that pressure much sooner, and that I would have told myself that, again, institutions, organizations, schools categorize out of some necessity, some intention, some need, but that doesn't mean those categories exist within you. They're something that's asked of you. And that's what I would have told myself. Lots of stress there. And I see students stressing, that feeling they need to decide so strongly towards one or the other, and artists. And if we think about grants, that's a great example. We're asked to divide, whether it's between creative practices or being an artist and a scholar. You have to be so careful about where you ask for money, and how you define your practice, how you define the work, how you define the project. and those categories can really shut down the potential of a person and their work. That's what I would tell myself.
Oh my goodness. Can you tell that to myself now? Yeah. Last question. Finish the sentence. I am
ready to disappear and write. I'm about to go on research leave for a year. And it's been a busy few years. It's been a wonderful few years. A lot of projects and public engagement, which I'm so dedicated to outside of the university, taking the work that the university provides me a platform and resources and community to do, but getting it out there. But the writing and being a parent in COVID, I'll say, shout out to all the parents in COVID. I'm really looking forward to having time to focus on writing up some old research, new revisions, and starting some new research, or digging more into this AGO work. It's called This Living Dancer, which is a self-archiving project, and it's really asking questions about methodology and some of the things we've been talking about today. So I am ready to disappear and write.
I love that. I need some of that in my life too. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for chatting with me. And I hope you have an awesome day and you get to disappear and write for a little bit too.
Yeah, I think I'm going to. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks to Cheryl as well for this invitation. It's really exciting work that's happening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seika Boye and Lisa Cox, for such a personal and informative conversation. And thank you for watching the first episode in our series, Remixing the Archive. Stay tuned for episode 2, Building an Archive, which will feature Atlanta-based artist, photographer, and archivist, Sierra King.